AITA for keeping my late mom's devastating secret after my family kicked me out? The smell of wilting lilies and warm wax hung heavy in the air of the funeral home. I, Maya, stood in a black dress that felt 2 sizes too big. Or maybe I was the one who had shrunk. Across the casket, Rick, my stepfather, fiddled with his tie, his eyes darting to his watch. My sister Jenna sobbed elegantly into her boyfriend's shoulder, each sniffle perfectly timed. I wasn't crying. Everything inside me felt parched. The thick silence was broken by the polished shoes of a man with a briefcase. Mr. Davison, the estate attorney, had the weary, professional face that only shows up at the worst moments. "My deepest condolences," he said in a voice that conveyed no feeling at all. Eleanor was very clear in her final wishes. "This will be brief." Rick straightened his shoulders. Jenna's sobs ceased instantly. I just clenched my hands in my pockets. Mr. Davison unfolded a document. "I bequeath my worldly goods as follows. To my husband, Rick Miller. The funds held in savings account number ending in 7399. The figures that followed were a blur of noise. I only saw the tight, quick smile that flickered across Rick's face. Money, always the money. The lawyer cleared his throat. The deed to the house in Oak Creek, with all its contents, shall pass to my daughter, Jenna Miller." Jenna let out a small gasp, this time one of genuine relief. Her eyes glistened. She didn't look at me. Nobody was looking at me. Mr. Davison paused, an uncomfortable shift in his posture. His eyes finally found mine. "To my daughter, Maya, I leave a promissory note." A quiet murmur rippled through the small gathering. I felt all their eyes on my back, sharp as pins. "It's a debt instrument. A debt of $50,000 owed to Mr. Arthur Vance, owner of Crestview Vineyards, dated January 12, 2025. The inheritor assumes the obligation to settle this debt." The silence was absolute. Then Rick cleared his throat. "Well, that's that. Everything's in order." He approached not me, but the lawyer to shake his hand. Jenna dabbed at a non-existent tear. I didn't move. $50,000. Fortune. Why had Mom never mentioned any debts, especially not to a man with that name? Arthur Vance, a ghost from her past. A name she would mention in a hushed tone before quickly changing the subject. Mr. Davison came over and placed a folded paper in my hand. It was cold. "I'm sorry, Maya," he murmured, and then he was gone. It was then that Rick and Jenna stood before me. My sister couldn't meet my gaze. Rick, however, held it. "Maya, kiddo," he said in that falsely tired voice he used to give commands. "This is how it is. Your mother wanted it this way. I get the money, your sister gets the house, and you get the debt. It's fair." Fair. The word came out as a ragged whisper. Jenna finally found her voice, sharp and defensive. "Mom decided. Are you going to question her final wishes? The house needs a new roof, you know. And Rick has expenses." Rick nodded gravely, as if he bore the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I don't have $50,000, I said, feeling the paper burn my skin. Rick placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture not of comfort but of dismissal. "That's your problem, kid. The debt is yours. The note has your name on it. You're on your own with this one." "But why? Why would Mom do this to me?" They looked at each other. A swift exchange loaded with something I couldn't decipher. "Who knows what was going through your mother's head at the end?" Rick said, letting me go. "The illness and all that, I suppose. Come on, Jenna, we need to speak with the funeral director." They turned and walked away, leaving me alone in front of the casket. The emptiness inside me was suddenly filled with a tidal wave of rage and utter confusion. $50,000. Arthur Vance. I took out the promissory note. It was signed by my mother in a shaky hand. The date was as clear as a scar. January 12. The day she got the diagnosis. The very same day. What on earth had happened? I folded the paper carefully and put it in my pocket. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a burden, a mystery, or a curse. Leaving the funeral home, the afternoon light of the California sun blinded me. Rick and Jenna were already pulling away in his truck, not looking back. I stood on the sidewalk in my black dress and my debt. I had to go see Arthur Vance. I had to know why my mother owed him so much money on the day her world fell apart. And why, God, why had she left me, the younger daughter, the forgotten one, to take the fall? I started walking aimless. The weight of the promissory note in my pocket was the only thing that felt real. The debt was mine, and before I drowned in it, I needed to know what it was made of. The paper burned in my pocket. $50,000. A week after the funeral, the number still echoed in my head, mixed with the silence from Rick and Jenna. They had moved into the house in Oak Creek. I was still in my small rented apartment in the city, with my low-paying graphic design job and the ghost of the debt. I had to face it. I looked up the address for Crestview Vineyards. It was up in Sonoma County, a well-known place I vaguely recalled. Mom never wanted to talk about him. Ancient history, Maya, not important. But $50,000 wasn't not important. I drove my beat-up sedan. The landscape shifted to rolling hills covered in vineyards. The winery was a large, imposing building of stone and redwood. It smelled of damp earth and oak. A tours by appointment only sign hung on the main gate. I rang the bell at a side entrance. A few minutes passed. A tall man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and a gaze as tired as mine, opened it. He wore stained jeans and a plaid work shirt. He didn't look like a prosperous businessman. Yes. His voice was rough. Good morning. I'm looking for Mr. Arthur Vance. You're speaking to him. Who are you? His eyes scanned me without recognition. I'm Maya, Eleanor Miller's daughter. I saw something tighten in his jaw. A quick blink. It wasn't surprise, it was discomfort, maybe even annoyance. Eleanor, he murmured. He made a vague gesture with his hand. Come in, but make it quick. I'm busy. He led me into a cluttered office filled with papers, catalogs, and sample bottles. He didn't offer me a seat, just leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. My mother passed away a week ago. I began, taking out the promissory note. I unfolded it and placed it on the mess on his desk. In her will, she left me this. A debt to you. Arthur Vance didn't even look at the paper. He fixed his eyes on mine. I know. I got the notice from the attorney. Davison, what a pain. His tone was cold, distant. $50,000. With interest it would be more. But I don't charge interest to the dead. His coldness gave me courage. Why? Why did my mother owe you so much money? That was between her and me. Alone. A business deal. The answer was automatic, rehearsed. A business deal? What kind of deal? I pressed. My mother was an administrator at a medical clinic. She didn't have business with wineries. He snorted. People have all sorts of business, kid. Your mother needed money. I lent it to her. It was an agreement between adults. The note is legal. The date is clear. For the first time, he pointed to the document with a callous finger. January 12, 2025. The date. I said, my voice tight. That's the day she was diagnosed with cancer. What kind of business deal gets made on the day you get news like that? Arthur Vance stood motionless. His gaze turned dangerous. A shadow crossed his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. She signed it. I had the money. End of story. Now if you're not going to pay, talk to my lawyer. I don't have time for a cross-examination. He stood up, gesturing to the door. The meeting was over. There was something else, something he was hiding. I picked up the promissory note. My fingers were trembling. How can I pay you? I don't have that kind of money, I said, my hand on the doorknob. He shrugged. Talk to a bank. Get a personal loan. It's not my problem. The note is due in 6 months. You have time, but not forever. His smile was bitter. I'm sorry for your loss, Maya. Truly. But business is business. I stepped out into the sunlight, feeling more lost than before. His attitude wasn't that of an eager creditor. It was that of someone who wanted to get away from something or someone. And the date, always that date. The drive back to the city felt long. I needed air. I pulled over at a roadside diner a few miles down the road. And then, through the large window, I saw them. At a booth inside with her back to me was Jenna. My sister was wearing enormous sunglasses, but I'd recognize her anywhere. And across from her, leaning over the table, speaking intensely, was Arthur Vance. I froze. What was Jenna doing here? How was this possible? She was supposed to be in Oak Creek, busy with her renovations. Arthur was talking. Jenna nodded nervously. Then she glanced around, as if making sure she wasn't being watched. She opened her purse, took out a thick manila envelope, and slid it to Arthur across the table. He took it quickly without looking at it, and tucked it inside his jacket. The blood roared in my ears. An envelope. Money. Was she paying him? Why? Arthur said something else, stood up, and left the diner through a back exit without a backward glance. Jenna sat for a moment, took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. She looked on the verge of tears. Then she paid the bill and left through the front, walking quickly toward her new car. A shiny compact SUV, parked nearby. She didn't see me. I was hidden behind a pickup truck, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just a debt. It was a lie. Jenna and Arthur knew each other. They met in secret and there was money involved. I got back in my car, my mind a blank slate. The city skyline appeared in the distance, but I no longer felt at home. I felt like I was in the middle of a strange territory, full of false signals. Jenna had the house, Rick had the money, and I had a debt that was clearly something more. What was in that envelope? A payment on account? A bribe? Why would Jenna give money to the man I was supposed to pay? I got to my apartment. The darkness was a relief. I took out the promissory note again. My mother's shaky signature. The day of the diagnosis, Arthur's cold reception, the image of Jenna sliding him that envelope. No, I wasn't going to pay. Not yet. First, I had to know. I had to know what my mother had bought with those $50,000 on the day her world was ending, and why my sister and the creditor were acting like accomplices. The debt was mine, but the truth that I would have to tear away from someone. The house in Oak Creek smelled of fresh paint and neglect. Jenna had changed the locks, but the old key I kept from when I used to look after Mom still worked on the back door that led to the patio. Rick had sold almost everything of value within a week. Only old furniture and boxes piled in the living room remained, waiting to be taken to a dumpster or a storage unit. I hadn't come to steal, I had come for answers. If my mother had taken on a huge debt on the darkest day of her life, maybe she had left a clue, something that Rick and Jenna, in their rush to divide the spoils, had overlooked. I went up to the attic, a dusty, cobweb-filled space where we kept our childhood belongings. There in a corner I found Mom's old leather suitcase, the one she always said contained unimportant things. Rick must have thought the same because he hadn't even opened it. Inside, under a faded shawl and some old photos, I found a bundle of papers tied with a ribbon. They weren't contracts, they were receipts, old invoices. And many of them bore a familiar letterhead. Crestview Vineyards. Arthur Vance, proprietor. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. They weren't from last year. They were from 29 years ago. Invoices for grapes, for transport, for corks. And on many in the memo line was a tiny letter, E, and a number like a code. Had Mom worked there? She never mentioned it. She always said her first job was at the clinic. But here was the proof, an old constant connection, until abruptly the invoices stopped. The last one was from July 1997. 1 month later, according to my own birth certificate, I was born. My heart lurched. This wasn't just a debt. It was a thread that was tangled in my mother's distant past, and in my own. I needed to talk to someone who had known her then. I went downstairs, suitcase in hand, when I heard a voice at the front door. Maya? Is that you, honey? It was Brenda, the lifelong neighbor. A woman as small and sharp as a sparrow who knew everything about everyone. She had seen a light on and had come to investigate. Hi, Brenda. Just picking up some of Mom's things. She looked at me with her bright little eyes, then at the suitcase. Yes, of course. Such a shame about Eleanor. And what a mess with the inheritance, huh? The whole neighborhood is talking. Her tone was juicy, expecting a confidence. They're talking. I asked, trying to sound neutral. Of course. Rick hitting the jackpot with the money, and Jenna parading around with her new house. And you, poor thing, with that mess of a debt. She paused dramatically. With that man. Arthur Vance. The name on her lips sounded like an old scandal. Did you know him, Brenda? Mr. Vance. She moved closer, lowering her voice, though no one else was there. Know him? Your mother, God rest her soul, worked for him for years before you were born. Over at the winery office. She was very young, Eleanor, very beautiful. Her eyes clouded with malicious nostalgia. And him, well, a man in his prime with problems at home, they say. Anyway, then she suddenly quit her job, and a little while later she married Rick, who had just lost his wife. All very fast. Brenda clicked her tongue. Life takes many turns, my dear. The insinuation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. What do you mean, Brenda? Nothing. Old business. But that promissory note, right? For a large amount. Maybe it's not just a loan, you know? Maybe it's an old score of a different kind. She winked at me as if we shared a secret. I felt a sudden disgust. My mother was an honorable woman, I said with more firmness than I felt. Oh, of course. No one's saying otherwise. But men and money, they tangle everything up. Brenda straightened her apron. Well, I'm off. Take care, Maya. And listen, be careful with this business. Some ghosts are best left undisturbed. She left, her words poisoning the air. Ghosts. Old scores. 1997. Me being born. Mom leaving her job. Marrying Rick in a hurry. I left the house feeling dirty. I took the suitcase to my apartment and emptied the papers onto the table. The receipts, the invoices, and at the bottom, a small black-covered notebook. A household accounting ledger from Mom's early years with Rick. Brief entries. Electricity, food, pharmacy. And then, on several pages, a set of initials AV and amounts, significant sums, especially in the first few years. Then they became less frequent. The last entry next to the initials was from 5 years ago. A smaller amount, $3,000, and one final phrase. Paid in full. It wasn't a debt. It was support, a regular payment. The idea cut through my mind like a shard of ice. Was Arthur Vance paying my mother something? Or was she paying him? The old receipts proved a business relationship and then a personal one. I couldn't sleep that night. The next morning I decided to confront Rick. I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the house in Oak Creek at lunchtime. I found him in the empty living room, drinking whiskey straight from the bottle, surrounded by unpacked boxes. What do you want? He grunted when he saw me. His eyes were glassy. I want to know what happened between Mom and Arthur Vance. He laughed, a dry, unpleasant sound. This again? I already told you. Alone. Some nonsense. I found old invoices from when she worked for him. Until 1997. The smile vanished from his face. So what? Lots of people work. Brenda, the neighbor, told me things. That old gossip. He exploded, getting to his feet. The bottle swayed dangerously in his hand. You have no idea about anything. Let it go, Maya. Pay the debt if you can and forget it. Why? What are you hiding? Why was Jenna giving Arthur Vance an envelope in a diner? Rick froze. The color drained from his face. The drunkenness seemed to clear for an instant, revealing pure fear. What? What did you see? You saw nothing. Your sister has nothing to do with this. But she does. I do. I shouted, all my fear and rage erupting at once. What am I to you, Rick? A nuisance? A reminder of something? Of whom? He looked at me then with a hatred so pure and cold that I took a step back. He hesitated, raising the bottle to his lips. He took a long swallow. When he lowered the bottle, his expression had changed. It was tired, defeated, and filled with an ancient resentment. You, he murmured, his voice thick with alcohol. You with your questions. Always the same, just like her, sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Stumbling, he took a step closer. His breath stank of cheap whiskey. I'll tell you, since you're so eager to know. That money, that debt, it's the price of a mistake. A mistake that should never have happened. What mistake? My voice was a thread. His clouded eyes lost focus, looking somewhere over my shoulder. He wasn't seeing me. He was seeing something from the past, something that tormented him. He whispered, almost to himself, the words that would be seared into my mind. The mistake was that child being born. That child should never have been born. Then, as if the words had deflated him, he collapsed into an armchair. His head fell to his chest and he began to snore. I stood there frozen. Not that girl. That child. That child should never have been born. I looked at the unconscious Rick, then at the empty walls of what had been my home. There was no doubt anymore. The debt wasn't money. It was a life. My life. And someone a long time ago had decided it shouldn't have happened. I left the house in silence. Now I had more questions and they were all worse. I had to find that child. I had to know why my birth was a mistake worth $50,000, and why my mother had signed a promissory note to pay for it on the day she learned she was dying. Rick's phrase echoed in my head like a sour note. That child should never have been born. Couldn't be me. But then who? What child? And what did it have to do with the $50,000 and with me? I spent days in my apartment surrounded by Mom's old papers. The winery receipts, her account book. Heavy. The sums. Couldn't be a coincidence. Arthur Vance and my mother had a history, and that history had cost money regularly for years until it stopped. Until the diagnosis, until the promissory note. I needed to know more. Arthur wouldn't tell me. Jenna was lying. Rick was drowning in resentment and booze. I had to go to the source, the winery. I didn't go back to the main entrance. This time on a Saturday morning, I blended in with a small group of tourists on a guided tour. It was a beautiful, well-kept winery with oak barrels and that smell of aged wine. While the guide talked about grape varieties, I slipped away from the group, pretending to take a photo, and ducked down a hallway marked offices, staff only. No one was there. The modern offices were empty. But at the end of the hall was a half-open door leading to an archive. Shelves filled with dusty binders. My heart was pounding. I looked for dates. 1996, 1997, 1998. I pulled out a binder at random. Payrolls 1997. My hand shook as I flipped through the pages. And there, in June 1997, I found her name. Eleanor Miller, Administration Department. Net pay $2,000. She had worked there until July. Then her name disappeared. Was she fired, or did she leave? In August 1997, she wasn't there. I checked the 1998 binder just in case. Nothing. But then under miscellaneous expenses, I saw something. Payments to a supplier called Delta Maintenance. Irregular amounts, but one every month. $500, $300, $750, always in cash. And a reference. External service tank cleaning. It seemed strange. Cleaning tanks every month with such variable amounts? I looked in other binders. The payments to Delta Maintenance continued until 5 years ago, then they stopped. The same date the heavy entries in Mom's notebook ceased. A chill ran down my spine. Delta Maintenance didn't sound like a real company. It sounded made up. I took out my phone and started taking pictures of the pages. I didn't know exactly why, but I felt it was important. What was this money leaving the winery irregularly? Was this the money that reached Mom? Were these the AV payments? Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hall. I slammed the binder shut and hastily put it back. I ducked behind a shelf. The footsteps stopped at the door. It was Arthur Vance. He was not in a good mood. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was a low growl. "How did you get in?" I stood up trying to look calm. "The guided tour. I got lost." "Don't lie to me," he said, entering and closing the door behind him. His gaze fell on the shelf where I'd taken the binder from. It wasn't perfectly aligned. "You're snooping. I already told you I don't want trouble." "I don't want trouble either," I said, finding courage from somewhere. "I just want to know the truth about my mother. About these payments to Delta Maintenance." His face went pale. He was a proud man, and seeing his secret exposed even just partially hit him hard. "That's none of your business. Those are winery expenses." "Cleaning expenses?" "Every month for years with different amounts that stopped 5 years ago. The same time my mother stopped writing AV in her notebook." He stood still, staring at me. He seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. The mask of the tough businessman cracked, revealing something else. Fear and an enormous fatigue. "You don't know anything, Maya," he said, and his voice was no longer harsh, just tired. "And it's better if you don't. I have a $50,000 debt to you. I think I have a right to know why." There was a long silence. He looked out the window toward the vineyards, then sighed. "Fine," he said, turning back. "Let's forget the debt." I thought I'd misheard. "I'm sorry. The promissory note. I'll tear it up. The debt is gone. You owe me nothing. He spoke quickly as if wanting to get rid of the words. On one condition, you give me everything. All the papers, receipts, notebooks, anything your mother kept related to me or the winery. And you stop asking questions forever. I was stunned. $50,000 erased in exchange for some old papers and my silence. It was a confession. Those papers contained something important, something worth much more than $50,000 to him. What's in them that scares you so much? I asked defiantly. Nothing scares me, he said, but his voice trembled slightly. I just want peace. And you want to be free of the debt. It's a good deal. Bring me everything you have tomorrow, and we'll be done with this. Without waiting for an answer, he opened the door and left, leaving me alone in the dusty archive with the poisoned offer hanging in the air. It wasn't a relief, it was a trap. I was sure of it. If the debt wasn't about money, what was it? What secret was so valuable? That night in my apartment, I spread all the papers across the table. Arthur's offer was tempting. To be free of that burden, but it also meant burying my mother's truth forever. And now with the story about that child, I couldn't. A soft knock on the door startled me. It was almost 11. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole. It was Jenna. Her eyes were swollen and red, and she was trembling. I opened the door. She came in without a word. She collapsed onto my sofa, hiding her face in her hands. For a minute, the only sound was her ragged breathing. Jenna, what's wrong? She lifted her head. Her face was ravaged by tears and something else. Panic. You have to stop, Maya. Please. You have to stop. Stop what? Investigating. Going to the winery. Asking questions. Arthur called me. He's furious. He says you were going through his files. And what do you care? I snapped, all my pent-up rage surfacing. Why are you so involved in this, Jenna? Why are you giving him envelopes of money? What does he owe you? Or what do you owe him? She broke down crying again, but this time it was brutal, gut-wrenching sobs. I don't owe him anything. It's the other way around. He owed us. Mom, you, me, everyone. I sat next to her, cold as ice. Talk. Or I'm calling the police right now and telling them about the envelope. She looked at me terrified. No, you can't. It would ruin everything. She swallowed hard, struggling to form the words. The money, the $50,000, it wasn't a loan for Mom. I know that. It was for Rick. The name fell between us like a stone. What? Rick has gambling problems. For years. Debts to some very serious people. A year ago they came to collect. They told him if he didn't pay, he'd be in a lot of trouble. The words came out in a torrent now, as if releasing them freed her from a huge weight. He came to her begging, crying. He begged Mom to save him, to take out a loan, but Mom had nothing. The house was mortgaged. He'd already spent her savings. She was desperate. A cold feeling spread through my stomach. And then she went to see Arthur Vance, the only man who, she said, had money and a reason to help her. Jenna looked at me, pleading for understanding. I don't know what happened between them in the past, Maya, I swear. But he agreed. He gave her the money, $50,000 in cash, as a private loan. But Mom insisted on signing a promissory note. She said she didn't want charity, that it was a debt of honor. It all fit. The date, the diagnosis. Mom, knowing she was dying, with the husband who had ruined her life hounded by debt, went to ask for help from the man who, whatever had been between them, had the means. And she signed a debt to save Rick. But why me? My voice sounded weak, broken. Why did she leave the debt to me? Why not Rick, the one at fault? Or you? Jenna started to tremble violently. Because the note wasn't Arthur's only condition. Her words were almost a whisper. He gave the money, but he asked for something in return. He wanted certainty that the matter between him and Mom would be closed forever. That any link, any future claim would be settled. He said that the promissory note with your name as the debtor was the way. That if anything came to light, the debt would fall on you. It was a way to ensure everyone's silence. Silence about what, Jenna? I grabbed her arm. What did Mom have to keep quiet about? What do I have to keep quiet about? I don't know, she cried, pulling free. I swear to God I don't know. Mom never told me. She just said it was something very old, very painful. That it was the price for having given me a family, a father, even if it was Rick. She was sobbing uncontrollably. And I convinced her. It was me, Maya. Rick told me that if I didn't convince Mom to sign, those men would hurt us all, that we'd lose the house. I was scared. I told Mom to do it, to sign, that it was the only way out. There it was. The complete betrayal. My sister, whom I had thought was ambitious but not evil, had pressured our dying mother to sign a debt that was really blackmail, and to leave it to me as the final guarantee of silence. The envelope, I said with a deadly calm. The one you gave Arthur at the diner. Jenna nodded, dejected. It was money from selling Mom's jewelry. Arthur started putting on pressure after the funeral. He said the deal was still on, that he expected our discretion. That a contribution for the winery would be a good show of faith. Rick forced me to take it to him to calm him down. I stood up, moving away from her. I couldn't look at her. The resentment was choking me. Get out of here, Jenna. Maya, please. Get out. I screamed. Get out before I say or do something I'll regret. She stood up, staggering, and went to the door. Before leaving, she turned. Arthur offered to cancel the debt, didn't he? In exchange for the papers. I said nothing. Take it, Maya, she whispered, tears in her eyes. Take the deal. He's dangerous when he's scared, and he's scared now. Pay with the papers and forget all of this. For Mom. For you. She left, closing the door softly. I was left alone in the middle of my mother's papers. The loan was to pay Rick's gambling debts, a blackmail to buy silence about a past secret. And my sister had been an accomplice. Arthur Vance wanted the papers. He wanted to erase the evidence, but now I had a much more valuable piece of evidence. Jenna's confession. And I knew that the secret, whatever it was related to a child who should never have been born. I picked up the promissory note. It was no longer just a debt. It was the key. And I wasn't going to give it to anyone. The papers were scattered on the table like pieces of a poisoned puzzle. Jenna's confession had given me a frame, but the central image was still blurry. What secret was worth $50,000 of silence? What child shouldn't have been born? Rick's words echoed, mixing with the old winery invoices and the date of my birth. Everything pointed to a truth my mind resisted forming. But there was a way to start, a tangible clue. My birth certificate. The official one from the county records. But there had to be more. Mom was meticulous. She saved everything. I searched the suitcase again, every pocket, every fold. Under the worn lining, my fingers found a small, yellowed envelope. Inside were a few carefully folded papers. One was my official birth certificate. The other was a hospital document, a discharge summary from the local hospital. Date: August 15th, 1997. Mother's name, Eleanor Miller. Baby's name, Maya. All in order. But at the bottom, in the notes section, there was a handwritten note in a different, tight script. Birth attended by collaborating midwife, Mrs. Helen Gable. Official registration process post-admission. And an illegible signature. Registration process post-admission. Why would a hospital record a birth in this way? And the official registration was filed 2 weeks later. I remembered Mom's notebook. The first payments from AV started shortly after my birth. A chill went through me. Helen Gable. I had a name. It wasn't much, but it was something. The internet gave me an old address in a quiet residential neighborhood. A call from a payphone, I didn't want my number to show up anywhere, confirmed that a retired Helen Gable still lived there. I hesitated. Arthur had offered me freedom in exchange for forgetting. Jenna had begged me to accept. But that phrase, post-admission, burned in my mind. I went the next day. It was a small apartment in a courtyard full of potted plants. The woman who opened the door was petite, with white hair in a bun and sharp blue eyes that scanned me from head to toe. Yes. Good morning. Are you Mrs. Helen Gable, the midwife? I was a long time ago. What do you want? Her voice was clear, with no trace of elderly confusion. I'm Maya. Eleanor Miller was my mother. I saw a flash of recognition, quick as lightning, followed by immediate caution. Her eyes narrowed. Eleanor. Yes. It's been a long time. Come in. Her living room was tidy, full of photos of children and families. She offered me a seat. "How can I help you, Maya? If it's about your birth, everything was normal. A long labor, but no complications." "It's not exactly about the birth," I said, taking out the copy of the hospital summary. I pointed to her name. "It's about this. It says the registration was processed post-admission." "Why?" Helen Gable became very still. Her hands, resting on her lap, tightened slightly. "It's just paperwork. Sometimes things take time. The hospital was very busy back then." "No, that's not it," I insisted gently. "Mrs. Gable, my mother has passed away and left many questions. I need to know the truth, please. Why this note? Why was the registration delayed?" She looked at me for a long moment. Her expression softened, a mix of pity and something that looked like remorse. "You look like her. Like Eleanor. You have her eyes." I said nothing. I waited. She sighed a long weary sound. "Your mother was a very frightened woman when she came to see me. She was pregnant, unmarried, and the baby's father was not an option. He couldn't acknowledge the child. The air left my lungs. Rick. My father." She shook her head slowly. "Rick Miller came along later. When Eleanor was already many months along. He stepped up. He said he loved her, that he would recognize the child as his own." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But for that, the paperwork had to be in order. An official birth record with a date and time signed by a hospital doctor. It was a very rigid system, hard to adjust." "Adjust," I repeated, feeling the floor give way beneath me. "I helped women in difficult situations," she said with a thread of pride in her voice. "It was my trade. I delivered you here, in my home. It was quick." She was strong. Then, a few days later, we went to the hospital. She was admitted, saying she had just given birth. I, as a collaborating midwife with privileges, signed the report with the date she needed. Her eyes clouded over. Rick was already there, acting like the concerned father. The official registration was filed with him as the parent. Everything clean, everything legal. Everything false. The room spun around me. And the biological father? Helen Gable flinched. "That, my dear, she never told me. She only said he was a man with an established life, a family. That he couldn't and wouldn't know anything. That his only condition was total silence. And that Rick agreed in exchange for having a wife and a daughter, I suppose. A man with an established life, a family. Arthur Vance, owner of a winery, married. It all fit together in a horrible, perfect way. Do you know if there was money involved? Payments?" The old midwife looked down. "That's no longer my business. I just helped bring a life into the world and give it a name. The rest was their decision." She looked at me with an old plea in her eyes. "It was almost 30 years ago. Let the past stay buried, child. Sometimes a lie is an act of love. Your mother wanted to protect you, to give you a father, a last name. I left her house feeling like a ghost. I was not Rick's daughter. My birth certificate was a sham, my life an arrangement. And Arthur was he. The payments, the blackmail for silence, the look of annoyance and fear. I arrived at my empty apartment. I didn't cry. I just sat in the dark with the weight of the truth crushing me. Who was I? The ringing of my cell phone startled me. An unknown number. "Hello? Maya Miller." A woman's voice, older with a polite but tense tone. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Catherine. Catherine Vance. I'm Arthur's wife. I need to see you. In person. Today." The blood froze in my veins. His wife. "I want to talk about your mother. About you. About things that are better not said over the phone. Do you know the cafe at the art museum? At 5 o'clock. Come alone. For your own good." She hung up before I could reply. At 5 o'clock sharp, I walked into the nearly empty cafe. I recognized her immediately from the Winery Society photos. Catherine Vance was a tall, slim, elegantly dressed woman with her white hair in a flawless bun. She had clear eyes and a serene expression that didn't quite hide the tension in her jaw. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Thank you for coming. Coffee?" "No, thank you. What do you want?" She smiled, a cold, courteous gesture. Direct like your mother, apparently. She took a sip of her tea. I know you've been asking questions, visiting my husband, stirring up the past. My mother left me a debt with your husband. It's natural to want to know why. The debt, she said, as if the word had a bad taste. Yes, a regrettable arrangement. My husband can be a soft man at times, with a misguided sense of charity. She stared at me. You look so much like her. It's unnerving. Why did you ask me here, Mrs. Vance? She pressed her lips together. To offer you some advice. Take my husband's offer. Destroy those old papers, take payment for your silence and get on with your life. And if I want to know the truth? The whole truth. Her eyes hardened. The truth, my dear, is often a luxury we can't afford. It can destroy families' entire lives. Like yours. I ventured. A flash of pain crossed her face, quickly suppressed. Like everyone's. My family, my son, our name, it's all at stake because of ghosts from 30 years ago. What ghosts? She paled. Her fingers closed tightly around her cup. You know what ghosts? The ghost of a child who shouldn't have been born. I know my mother worked for your husband. I know she stopped working when I was born. I know there were payments for years. And I know my birth certificate is a fake, that Rick Miller is not my father. The words came out like knives, and I enjoyed watching each one hit her. She took a deep breath, seeking control. Look, Maya, I'm going to be frank with you because I believe you're intelligent. What happened between Arthur and your mother was a mistake. A slip-up from a man in a moment of weakness. She was young, attractive, and he was foolish. When she became pregnant, it was a very difficult situation. There was the confirmation. The world narrowed to her cold, clear voice. My husband was afraid of me, of our son, of the scandal. She was afraid too. She wanted to give her child a father, a decent life. They came to an agreement. Arthur would provide financial support. In exchange, she would leave, find another man, and never, ever reveal the truth. And she did. She married that drunk, Rick, who apparently accepted the role in exchange for a comfortable life paid for by us for years. Every word was a blow. I was the mistake, the slip-up, the product of blackmail and a secret deal. So, I managed to say, my throat dry, Arthur Vance is my father. Catherine Vance stared at me. There was no affection in her gaze, only cold, desperate calculation. That is a possibility. A very painful and inconvenient possibility for everyone. But it's only a possibility, Maya. There's no way to prove it, and I advise you not to try. There are DNA tests, I said defiantly. She smiled, a sad, bitter smile. And who would take one? My husband won't. It would ruin everything he's built. You can't force him. And even if you succeeded, what would you gain? A father who never wanted you. A piece of an estate disputed in court. The scandal, the destruction of my son's family. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. I'd gain the truth. And sometimes, Maya, the truth is the most useless and destructive thing there is. Take the money. Take your freedom. And leave us in peace. Let me, my son, our business have peace. It's what your mother wanted. A paid for silence. She stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the table. Think about it, but don't take too long. My husband is more compassionate than I am. I only see a threat to my family, and I will do whatever it takes to protect them. She left, her expensive perfume and her threat lingering in the air. It wasn't a confirmation. It was a warning, an offer of surrender. Catherine Vance wouldn't give me the proof, and without it, I was just a possible illegitimate daughter, an inconvenient secret, a ghost with a promissory note. But now I knew, or at least suspected with all my soul. I wasn't Rick's daughter. I was the daughter of a secret, of a mistake, of a cowardly deal. And my inheritance wasn't a debt. It was a lie that had propped up the lives of everyone around me. What was I supposed to do with that? Bury it as they all wanted? Or use it as a weapon to claim an identity no one wanted to give me? Catherine Vance's warning was seared into my mind. A threat to my family. That's what I was. An inconvenient mistake, a secret that could shatter their perfect life. But I had no peace to protect. I only had a hole in my identity and a dull rage that grew every day. Rick was getting worse. I knew it when he called one night, his voice thick and slurring from alcohol and something else. Panic. Maya, you have to talk to that man. He coughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. What man, Rick? Vance, he nearly shouted. You have to tell him to stop calling me. That he's had enough. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Arthur? He's calling you? Why? The money. What else? His voice broke into a drunken sob. He says the deal has changed, that 50,000 wasn't enough. That silence costs more now. That if I don't give him 20,000 more, he'll tell everyone everything. Tell them what, Rick? I asked ice cold. What can he tell them that isn't your own shame for making your dying wife beg for money to cover your debts? There was a heavy silence on the other end, then a harsh whisper full of hatred. It's not my shame, you brat. It's everyone's. Your mother's and her lover's. Yours, the bastard daughter's. He took a ragged breath. He says if I don't pay, he'll tell everyone who you really are, that he'll ruin your life and mine. But I don't care anymore. I don't have a cent. He knows that. But you have something he wants. Those damn papers. Give them to him. Give them to him and let him leave us in peace. He hung up abruptly. I was left trembling, not with fear but with fury. Arthur, scared by my investigation, wasn't just offering me a deal. He was also pressuring Rick. And Rick, in his desperation, was trying to use me as a bargaining chip. The cornered rat biting whoever it could. Then I understood. Arthur was afraid of the papers, yes, but he was also afraid of something else they might contain, something I hadn't found. Catherine had spoken of ghosts. Rick, of telling everyone everything. What if the truth wasn't just about my birth? What if there was something more? I had to go back to the winery. Not to the office but to where it all began. Where my mother worked. Where that mistake started. I waited for a day they were closed. A Sunday afternoon. The winery would be empty. I climbed the old back fence, the one overlooking the vineyards, my heart in my throat. I knew the layout from the tour. I headed for the oldest part, the underground cellars where the oldest barrels were stored. The air was cold and smelled of dampness, wood, and fermented grapes. Hanging bulbs cast long, shifting shadows. I didn't know what I was looking for, just a gut feeling, a desperate need to scratch at the foundations of the lie. At the back of the last room, behind a row of dust-covered barrels, was an old, almost invisible wooden door. It was locked with a rusty padlock, but the wood around it was rotten. With a sharp tug I managed to rip the top hinge off and squeeze inside. It was a tiny room, an old abandoned storeroom or office. There were stacked boxes, rusted tools, and an old wooden desk eaten by humidity. Nothing of value. I was about to turn back in frustration when I saw that one of the desk drawers was slightly ajar. Something gleamed inside. It was a small old key, and taped with dry adhesive to the bottom of the drawer was a folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers I opened it. It was a rudimentary map of the winery, and in a corner near the old disused concrete fermentation tanks was an X marked with my mother's pencil. I recognized her handwriting, and one word, here. I didn't think twice. I ran to the room with the old concrete tanks, gray cold monoliths. On the floor near the wall, one stone slab looked less dusty than the others. I kicked it with my heel. It sounded hollow. I had no crowbar. I looked around and found an iron rod. With a desperate effort I managed to jam it into a crack and pry. The slab moved, revealing a dark space. Inside, protected by a rolled-up plastic bag, was a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. I took them and sat on the cold floor under the dim light of a single bulb. They were letters from my mother, addressed to no one or to herself, handwritten diary entries from different times. And some, the oldest ones, were addressed to A. I started to read. The first one spoke of her job at the winery, of how much she was learning, of her admiration for the owner, a self-made man, so sad at times. Then the admiration turned into something more. He smiled at me today. I felt like I was melting. Then the tone changed. I'm scared. This can't happen. He has a family. But when he's with me, he makes me feel alive. And then the key letter, the one that made me stop breathing. Date: May 1997. Dear A. I know. I've known for a week. I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. You told me this couldn't happen, that we had to be careful, and I was stupid. Now I'm carrying the consequences, and I know what they will be. You won't want anything to do with it. You can't. Your wife, your son, your position, it's all more important. I'm just the office girl. I understand. I won't ask you for anything. But I need to disappear, find a job far away. But I have no money and I'm afraid. A few pages later, another letter from July 1997, just before she left the job. I've spoken to Rick. He's a drunk and not a good man, but he's desperate. His wife died, he's alone, and he has debts. I've told him a version of the story. I told him the baby belongs to a boyfriend who left me. I told him that if he marries me, gives the child a last name and a woman to care for his young daughter, Jenna, he'll have a home. And in return I'll have security. He's accepted. But there's a condition. He's afraid of the gossip, that the real father will show up one day and take his family away. He's asking for a guarantee. Money. A sum to keep him quiet, to ensure the secret is kept. He calls it compensation. I call it blackmail. But I have no choice. I need you to help me one last time. Give me that sum, and I promise I will never bother you again. The child will be his, I will be his wife, and you will go on with your life. It's the only way. Please. Hot tears fell on the old paper. I saw my young, terrified mother, selling her life and mine to a miserable man to buy a facade of respectability for another, cowardly one. And then the last relevant letter. A single sheet, undated, but from the context it must have been from about a year ago, shortly before the diagnosis. For Maya, if you ever find this. My darling girl, if you are reading this, it means I have failed. That the truth has come out, or that you were smarter than all of us. Forgive me. Forgive me for the biggest lie. Rick is not your father. Your biological father is a man I once loved, and who loved me, but whose love was not as strong as his fear. I chose you. I chose you over him. Over everything. I made a deal with Rick so you could have a name, a roof, a sister. And I made another deal with your father, regular money, a disguised allowance so Rick wouldn't kick us out. I was weak. I was afraid. And then when I learned I was dying and Rick, with his debts, came to me begging, I knew it was time to close the circle. I went to see your father. I asked him for the money to pay Rick's debts in exchange for my eternal silence. But this time I didn't want a secret deal. I wanted a promissory note, a real debt with your name on it, so that if Rick or your father ever tried to hurt you or deny who you are, you would have this. A paper that indebted you to him but also tied him to you. A reminder of his guilt. My last, clumsy act of protection. I leave you this debt, my daughter, not for you to pay it, but for you to use as a weapon, if you ever need to defend yourself from the wolves I have filled your life with. I love you always. Mom. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. It wasn't a debt, it was a shield, a weapon. My mother, on her deathbed, hadn't cursed me with a burden. In the most twisted, desperate way possible, she had given me the key to my freedom. The promissory note wasn't for me to pay. It was to force Arthur to keep the secret or face a legal claim that could uncover everything. And to tie Rick, because if he talked, the debt and the scandal would fall on me, but also on him for his years of blackmail. I understood everything. The AV payments, Rick's pressure, Arthur's offer to cancel the debt for the papers. He wanted to erase the last vestige, the instrument my mother had created to protect me. I left the winery like an automaton, the letters clutched to my chest. It was dark. I don't know how I got to my apartment. Only when I was inside with the door locked, did I let myself sink to the floor and weep. I wept for my mother, scared and brave. I wept for the girl I was, raised in a lie. I wept with rage against Rick, against Arthur, against the cowardice of men. A knock on the door startled me. It was Jenna. This time she wasn't crying. She looked exhausted, empty. Rick came by, she said in a hoarse voice. He's drunk. He says he's going to see Arthur tomorrow. That if he doesn't get the money, he's going to tell the press everything. To destroy him. I looked at her, the letters still in my hand. And what do you want me to do, Jenna? Give the papers to Arthur so he can pay Rick and everyone can go on happy with their silence. She shook her head slowly. No. I came to tell you the truth. All of it. She took a deep breath. When Mom got sick and Rick came with his debt problem, I didn't just convince her to ask for the money. I was the one who gave her the idea to put the promissory note in your name. The world stopped. What? Rick was desperate. He said Arthur would never give money to him, that he'd only give it to Mom because of the past. But he needed a guarantee that Mom wouldn't talk later when she was gone. And that maybe if the debt was left to you, you would also keep quiet out of fear or whatever. Her tears began to fall silent. I was scared, Maya. Scared those men would come. Scared of losing the house, of losing everything. And I told Mom, put the debt on Maya. That way Arthur will know the secret is still safe because Maya won't want a debt like that. And Rick will get his money. It was me. It was my idea. Mom didn't want to. She fought it. But she was so weak. And in the end she signed. She collapsed into sobs. He used me. Rick used me and I used you. I saddled you with this to save my own skin. And now it's all falling apart because Rick is a greedy, stupid animal. I felt no anger, just an infinite weariness. Jenna wasn't evil. She was weak and scared, just like my mother had been. Just like everyone in this story of fear and lies. You have to stop him, Jenna, I said with a new calm. You have to stop Rick. How? He's out of control. I showed her the letters. With the truth. The whole truth. He thinks he has power with this secret, but the power is mine now. While she read, her eyes growing wider and wider, I picked up the phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Arthur. I dialed the number for Mr. Davison, the lawyer, the man who had read the will in a neutral voice. Mr. Davison, this is Maya Miller. I need an appointment first thing tomorrow morning. It's urgent. I have documents related to my mother's will, and a possible case of blackmail. I hung up. Jenna looked at me pale. What are you going to do? What my mother intended, I said, gathering the promissory note and the letters. Use her final inheritance. The fear was still there, but now underneath it was something more solid. A cold rage and a clear purpose. They had left me the debt and I was going to collect it my way. The morning was cold and gray when I arrived at the winery with my mother's letters and the promissory note in my bag, and a steely resolve in my veins. I hadn't called. I knew he would be there. On Sunday mornings, as Brenda had once told me, Arthur Vance inspected the barrels in solitude, his ritual. This time I rang the bell at the main entrance. I wasn't an intruder. I was a creditor coming to negotiate. Catherine, his wife, opened the door. She was dressed in street clothes as if she were about to leave. When she saw me, her serene expression cracked, showing first surprise, then cold hostility. What do you want? I already told you. I need to speak with your husband. Now. It's in your own best interest. My voice sounded firmer than I felt. My husband has nothing to discuss with you. You have the offer on the table. Accept it or reject it, but don't bother us again. If he doesn't speak with me in the next 5 minutes, everything in this envelope, I said, holding up the folder where I'd kept copies of the letters, will go directly to the lawyer handling a potential lawsuit for coercion and blackmail against Rick Miller. And your name, and the name of this winery, will appear in the case file forever. Catherine paled. Before she could answer, a tired voice came from inside. Let her pass, Catherine. Arthur appeared in the hall. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. His shoulders were slumped, and there was a deep sadness in his eyes. His wife shot him a furious look but stepped aside reluctantly. She followed me to the office, the same one from my first visit. He sank into his armchair without offering me a seat. I remained standing in front of the desk. You have an hour. Rick is coming to see us, Catherine said from the doorway, arms crossed. What have you come for, Maya? Arthur asked, ignoring her. To reject my offer in person? Fine. The debt still stands then. With interest if you like. I took out the copies of the letters and placed them on the desk. Then the original promissory note. I haven't come to talk about the debt. I've come to talk about this. He looked at the papers, recognizing my mother's handwriting immediately. A tremor ran through his hands. Where did you find these? Where my mother hid them. For me. In the winery. Where it all began. Catherine lunged forward, trying to grab the letters. This is private property. This is an invasion of privacy. Catherine, stop. Arthur's voice was a dry whip crack. She froze, surprised. He didn't take his eyes off the papers. Leave us, Catherine. Arthur. I said leave us, he shouted, slamming the desk with the palm of his hand. It was the first time I'd seen him lose control. Catherine, hurt and furious, turned on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. He took a deep breath, running a hand over his face. Have you read them? He asked without looking at me. Yes. Then you know almost everything. Almost everything, I confirmed. I know my mother loved you. I know you were afraid. I know you paid for years to buy her silence and Rick's. And I know that this promissory note, I touched the paper, is not a debt. It's my mother's final blackmail against you, to force you to stay quiet, to protect me. Arthur nodded slowly, his eyes closed. Eleanor was always smarter and braver than I was. He opened his eyes. They were moist. She didn't want that money for herself at first. She wanted it to buy Rick's signature on your birth certificate to give you a name. I was a coward. I paid out of relief, out of fear, to buy my own peace of mind at the cost of hers. And the last loan? The $50,000. It was to pay Rick's debts, just as Jenna told you, he whispered. She came here the day she knew she was dying. She was shattered but serene. She told me Rick was in trouble, that if he didn't pay he'd be seriously hurt, and that you girls would be thrown out of the house. She didn't want to die leaving you on the street. A tear escaped down his wrinkled cheek. She begged me. Not for herself, for you, she said. Help her one last time. Save her from the ruin I'm leaving her. I gave her the money. In cash. I didn't want any paper. But she insisted. She said, I want a promissory note. In Maya's name. I didn't understand. I got angry. I thought it was to tie me down so she could ask for more later. And it wasn't? I asked, though I already knew the answer from the letter. No. Sometime later after I'd signed, she called me. It was the last time we spoke. His voice broke. She told me, Arthur, that note isn't for you, it's for her. It's a shield. If Rick or you or anyone ever tries to hurt her or deny who she is or kick her out, she has that paper. A paper that legally obligates you, she said. Use it to scare Rick if you have to. Use it to remind yourself that you have a daughter in the world to whom you owe at least your silence in your absence, or your help if she ever needs it. She told me this crying. It's the only strong thing I can leave her, she said. A sob shook his body, dry and painful. And I, in my stupidity, in my selfishness, I only saw a threat. A form of blackmail. I didn't see the love. I didn't see a desperate mother protecting her cub from the wolves. And I was one of them. He beat his chest with his fist. That's why I wanted the papers. To erase my guilt. To erase her memory, her final act of love that made me see myself for what I was. A small, frightened man. I stepped closer. All my rage was transforming into something different. A vast, weary sorrow. And the child, Arthur? The child who should never have been born? Rick said that. Arthur lifted his head. His eyes bloodshot. He told you that. A flash of the old anger appeared in his gaze. That miserable man. He's the one who told you, wasn't he? That you shouldn't have been born. He did. He stood up, turning his back, looking out the window toward his vineyards, his life, his legacy. When he spoke, his voice was clear and full of an infinite bitterness. The child he was referring to wasn't you, Maya. The world stopped. What? He turned. Your mother, when we started our relationship, she was already pregnant. With Rick's child. The floor disappeared from under my feet. No. That's not possible. Jenna is older than me. She. Not from Rick and his first wife. From Rick and her, he nearly shouted. Eleanor and Rick were already seeing each other sporadically before she and I began. He was recently widowed, lost, drunk. She was young, maybe felt some pity for him. It was one night, a mistake, and from that came a pregnancy. He leaned on the desk as if he could barely stand. She came to me terrified. She didn't know what to do. I fell in love with her, I admit it. I told her I would help her, that I would leave my wife, that we would raise the child together. I was a fool. When my family, my father especially, found out, it was hell. He threatened to disinherit me. To ruin me. And I backed down. I told Eleanor I couldn't, that I needed time. Desperate, she went and told Rick. He, instead of rejecting her, saw an opportunity. He told her he would marry her, that he would recognize the child as his own. But in exchange for money. My money. A payment for his silence and for playing the father. And that's how the blackmail began. Every word was a hammer blow. Then the child. She lost the baby. A miscarriage at 3 months. His eyes were full of tears. It was a terrible blow for her, for both of us. Rick, the scoundrel, even tried to make me keep paying, saying it was for emotional damages. That was the real child who shouldn't have been born. The one Rick used as an excuse to bleed me dry for years. And when you came along, Maya. When your mother and I, well, we had another moment of weakness, and this time she gave birth to you. He came closer, looking at me directly with a painful intensity. I am not your father, Maya. The room was silent. I didn't know if I felt relief or disappointment. It was a strange emptiness. The tests. I murmured. If you want to do them, we'll do them. But they'll give you the same result. There is no biological link between us. He sighed. Your biological father was a man who passed through your mother's life after she and I broke up, before she went back to Rick for good. Some guy who disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy. She never wanted to tell me his name. She said it was better that way for everyone. For you. Rick agreed to recognize you too because the blackmail was still profitable. I paid, and he had a family that gave him an air of respectability, and your mother had some security for her 2 daughters. It all fit. Rick's hatred for me wasn't the hatred for a reminder of his wife's infidelity, but the hatred for a substitute. I was the child who was born alive and kicking, while the son of his blood, the one who could have tied him to Eleanor without any need for blackmail, had died. I was a reminder of his failure, his perpetual debt, and the woman who never truly loved him. The $50,000 promissory note, I said, was the last payment. But not for Rick. It was for your mother so she could die in peace thinking she had protected you. And for me it was a way to pay in some small way, a tiny part of the debt of happiness I owed her. He wiped his eyes. But I failed. I let fear rule me again. When I found out you were asking questions, investigating, I thought you wanted to expose me, ruin me. That's why I wanted the papers. That's why I pressured Rick to stop you. I was a fool. Again. There was a long silence. The air in the room seemed lighter, though heavy with sadness. Rick is coming today, I remembered. For his money. To blackmail you now. Arthur nodded with a sad smile. Yes. And he's going to find me sitting here with you and with his lawyer, if he's the one who comes. And we're going to tell him a story, the complete story. And we're going to give him 2 options. His gaze hardened. 1, he leaves here, signs a document renouncing any claim on your mother's estate and on you, and gets out of your lives forever, in exchange for us not reporting him for blackmail and fraud with your birth documentation. Or 2, we all go to the police station right now with the letters, the receipts and my testimony, and we'll see how long his grieving father facade lasts in a courtroom. The determination in his voice was new. He seemed to have lifted a weight from his shoulders. He was no longer the frightened man. He was a man, however late, owning up to his mistakes. And you? I asked. What about your family? Catherine? Do they know the truth or most of it? My son, not all the details, but he knows your mother existed, that it was a painful mistake. Catherine has always known. That's why she hates your existence. You're the living proof of my weakness. He took a deep breath. My debt to them I will pay for the rest of my life. But my debt to your mother, I think today, finally, I can begin to settle it by helping you. The doorbell rang. A long, insistent, drunken ring. It was Rick. Arthur and I exchanged a look. In it there was no longer enmity or fear. Just a weary understanding and a common purpose. Ready? He asked. I nodded. Ready. I went to open the door. Rick stood there, his jacket wrinkled, his gaze bloodshot, his breath reeking of cheap alcohol. Seeing me instead of Catherine, his smug smile faltered. What are you doing here? I came to see Vance. Come in, Rick, I said, stepping aside. We're all waiting for you. He stumbled in, muttering. When he saw Arthur standing behind the desk and the letters and the promissory note spread out, his drunken confidence began to crack. And when, from a corner of the room, Mr. Davison the lawyer nodded solemnly, His face completely fell. The final game, the one my mother had devised with her last breath, was about to begin. And for the first time I wasn't the pawn. I was the player. Rick chose option 1. It was surprising, but it wasn't. Underneath the drunkenness and bravado, there was only a coward. Faced with Mr. Davison's cold evidence, my mother's letters and Arthur's look of final disgust, he deflated like a balloon. He signed the papers renouncing any rights to Mom's estate and, most importantly, any claim on me. In return, we wouldn't go to the police. For now. Mr. Davison was clear. If you approach either of the sisters, if you attempt any kind of contact or threat, these documents go straight to a judge, along with a complaint for coercion and a 2-decade history of blackmail. Rick nodded mutely and staggered out of the winery, smaller than I had ever seen him. Arthur kept his word. A few days later, a bank transfer for $50,000 appeared in my account. A terse email from him read, "This was always hers. Now it's yours. It's not a payment, it's restitution." I don't expect a reply. I didn't give him one. I didn't know what to say. He wasn't my father, but he had been, in his clumsy, guilty way, someone important to my mother. That was enough. It had to be. It was Jenna who made the next move. She came to my apartment a week later with a lawyer's folder under her arm and a new determination in her eyes. "I want to sell the house in Oak Creek," she said without preamble. "And I want half of it to be yours." I just stared at her. "It's your inheritance, Jenna. Your house." "No." Her voice trembled, but not with tears. It was with strength. "It's not. It's Mom's house. And she left it to me. Why? Because I begged her to. Because I was the oldest. Because I had more of a right. 1,000 selfish excuses. But you and I both know the truth. That house was bought, maintained, and saved from Rick's clutches with Arthur's money. With the blackmail money, and with Mom's sacrifice." She came closer, putting the folder on the table. "I've spoken with an agent. It's worth a lot. With my half, I can buy something smaller near my job. With your half, you can do whatever you want. Start over. It's what's fair, Maya. For the first time in my life, I want to do what's fair." There was no argument. I nodded. The house sold in a month. The market was hot. When the money arrived, the figure in my bank account took my breath away. It wasn't wealth, but it was freedom. A freedom my mother never had. One Sunday afternoon, the kind where the California sky is a merciless blue, we met at the cemetery. It was Jenna's idea. We arrived separately. We found each other by the simple white marble headstone, which only read, "Eleanor Miller. Mother. 1970-2025. We stood for a while in silence, each with our own thoughts. The resentment had dissolved, leaving a well of sadness and, surprisingly, a tired affection. "I always knew he loved me less," Jenna said suddenly, not looking at me. "Rick, I mean. And I think sometimes I felt Mom did too. Because I was his daughter, his real one, and every time she looked at me, she must have been reminded of him, of her mistake, of her trapped life." "I don't think she loved you less," I said, and it was true. "I think she had to protect you in a different way. She left me a debt as a weapon. She left you a roof as a shelter. They were both acts of love, just clumsy like everything about her." Jenna looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw my sister, not the rival, not the accomplice. I saw the scared little girl who also grew up among lies. "Forgive me, Maya. Truly." "And you forgive me," I replied, "for thinking you did it out of malice and not out of fear." We hugged. It was an awkward hug at first, full of years of distance, but slowly the tension eased. We both cried for Mom, for ourselves, for the family we never had and the one we could perhaps become from now on. "I'm never talking about this again," Jenna whispered when we separated. "The past, Arthur, any of it. I want to look forward." "Me too," I nodded. And it was true. The past was no longer a monster chasing me. It was a sad story that I now understood and could put away in a drawer without it poisoning me. I used the money, part of Arthur's payment and my half of the house sale, not to buy luxuries but to buy a future. A small storefront with an exposed brick oven in a quiet neighborhood. I had always loved kneading dough, the smell of yeast, the calm of shaping the loaf. Mom taught me. She used to say you couldn't lie in bread, or it wouldn't rise. Eleanor's oven opened its doors in the spring. The smell of fresh, crusty bread filled the street every morning. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Ours really. Hers and mine. On opening day, I hung something behind the counter, framed in simple light wood. The original promissory note. The $50,000. My mother's shaky signature. The date that marked the beginning of the end and, unbeknownst to her, a new beginning for me. Some curious customers would ask, "What's that?" "An abstract painting." I would smile. "It's the most valuable inheritance my mother ever left me." And it was. It wasn't a reminder of the debt, or the blackmail, or the lie. It was a reminder of her courage. Of the most twisted and desperate love, but love nonetheless. That even on her deathbed, she fought to give me a weapon to defend myself. And I had finally learned how to use it, not to attack but to build something new and solid. Something as honest as fresh bread. Jenna visits often. Sometimes she brings her boyfriend, a serious, kind guy who knows nothing of our ghosts. Rick disappeared. They say he went back east. I don't want to know anymore. Arthur Vance passed away a year later of a heart attack. His son took over the winery. I read the obituary in the paper. I didn't go to the funeral. It wasn't my place. But one afternoon his son, a man my age with his eyes, came into the bakery. He didn't say who he was, just asked for a loaf of sourdough. As he was leaving, he left a bottle of red wine on the counter. No label, just a black ribbon. "From the '97 vintage," he said. I nodded. "Kept it. I haven't opened it. Maybe I never will." Now, when I knead the dough before dawn and see the framed promissory note on the wall, I don't feel bitterness. I feel peace. The debt is settled, not the one of money, but the one of understanding. Mom did what she could with the wrong tools but the right intention. And I, in the end, inherited that. The tenacity, the will to rise, to knead again, to make something good and nourishing out of a disaster. Life, like dough, sometimes falls. Sometimes it doesn't rise the way you expect. But there's always another batch. Another day, another beginning. And mine smells like freshly baked bread and truth. Finally at peace. Did you enjoy this story? Leave a comment and hit the subscribe button to support the channel. More tales are on the way.